Hello and welcome to Fintech Insider Insights. I'm Benjamin Ensor, Director of Research and Strategy at 11FS. In this episode, we are discussing fintech hubs and how difficult or not it is to create them globally. To do that, we're going to hone in on the importance of government and regulator support to drive fintech hubs. Around the world, whether it's in Canada pushing for open banking or Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 program, harnessing the combined power of a whole sector and community can achieve extraordinary results, driving forward fintech hubs. So we're going to discuss the benefits of a fintech hub, how hubs are created, and the challenges of doing so. And we're going to look at the importance of maintaining a strong relationship between government and industry, and why fintech hubs can be the driving force behind this. To drive this conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of global fintech superstars. Firstly, I'm delighted to welcome Lord Chris Holmes of Richmond. It's an absolute pleasure to have you join us. I'm sure the life of a lord is quite busy, but can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. My focus in Parliament, and for those outside the UK, the House of Lords is equivalent to the United States Senate, so it's the upper house of the UK Parliament. And my role is to focus on all of the new technologies for public good. So a lot around AI, blockchain, a huge amount around fintech, financial services, but always looking to see how through combination of the technologies and collaboration and a crowding in of talent, we can just achieve such tremendous results, not just in the UK, but very much looking outwards, very much an international, a global perspective for the benefit of citizens right around the world.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm also delighted to be joined by Pat Patel, Executive Director at Elevandi. It's great to have you with us, Pat. For listeners who don't know Elevandi, please would you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Thank you very much for the invitation to be on the podcast. And my career has been a bit of a Frankenstein career. So I spent quite a few years in the payments world, working for a company called VocalLink, and was heavily involved in its real-time payment services. So UK faster payments, but more importantly, how you can deploy that in other markets, because this was a groundbreaking technology. After that, for some reason, I decided to join a conference business. So I worked with the founders of Money 2020 to build out what they were doing in Vegas, across to Europe, to Singapore, to China. And it was during this time I then got a great opportunity to work for the Monetary Authority of Singapore. So I upped sticks from my home in London, which I love very much still, to work in Singapore for the regulator. And during the role there, which was to build corridors, build bridges between different fintech ecosystems in different regions, we built a business case, secured seed capital, and then built a team and then spun out from the regulator. It's definitely not a well-trodden path. I wouldn't advise that route to set up your own business. But it's basically led us to set up a business called Elevandi, which connects the public and the private sector. And the best way to kind of see this is it's bringing together policymakers, regulators from multiple jurisdictions, together with technologists and together with financial institutions. And so all of these three kind of distinct communities, we believe, are core to the future of financial services. And it's all anchored around roadmaps. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But that's my background. So it's a Frankenstein career, but it serves me very well in today's current world.
Well, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm also delighted to be joined by Miranda Pirumal, founder and CEO at Scale. Welcome, Miranda. It's fantastic to have you on the show too. Please, can you also tell our listeners a little bit about you and what you're doing at Scale, please?
Thanks, Benjamin, and thanks to the 11FS team for having me. I've never been on a podcast with the Lord before, so this is very cool. I'm very grateful for the invitation, looking very forward to the conversation. So my background is in technology enablement, purely on the issuing side. I have been in payments for the past decade, with a strong focus on emerging market, non-bank use cases, predominantly across the African continent. So I spent a good couple of years at a business called Tutuka, And they're a South African founded issuer processor. You would have seen their story. They were acquired by Taya, subsequently merged with Paymentology, and now under the global brand Paymentology. And about 2 years ago, I left and I joined Visa. And that's where I led their digital partnership, fintech and venture strategy for sub-Saharan Africa, with a strong focus on, curating the fintech ecosystem across this region, structuring partnerships, and in a way that was almost, creating the soil for them to grow, but from a Visa perspective. And recently, about 6 months ago, took the very brave, courageous step to bow out of the formal employment world, start a business. So I started a fintech called Scale, and we're really focused on supporting fintechs with their go-to-market and then their speed to revenue, which combines regulators, financial service providers, bank BIN sponsors, the payment networks, KYC providers, and a whole host of VAS providers that are required in order to issue payment instruments in the market, subsequently scale those businesses and use cases across the continent and then globally. It's been a roller coaster of a journey in these 6 months. No regrets though. I'm enjoying it, and excited to see what's to come on the continent and far beyond.
Fantastic. Well, good for you, and best of luck with it.
Thank you.
Okay, let's dive in. So what we want to do is start by having a look at, or talking about, what fintech hubs do, how they're created, and how governments can, accelerate or maybe slow them down. Miranda, I think I'm going to throw the first question to you, and it's a superficially easy one. When is a fintech hub a fintech hub? What defines a fintech hub, do you think?
I think from my experience, and I'll speak specifically across the region that I'm in, right, and that I know the best. It is where the activity and the action happens. It's when these founders, entrepreneurs, innovative solutions, trends, new regulation, where that is born out of. And that is because there's a concentration of activity, in these areas. I think though that it's quite broad, right? If you think of, and I know that we'll unpack this in more detail later on, but I think that it's these places that fintechs get attention and exposure into their own potential for expansion, deployment, investment, and so forth.
Lord Holmes, perhaps I can bring you in here too. Are fintech hubs just big cities that kind of already had a big concentration of financial services companies? I mean, places like Hong Kong, Singapore, New York, San Francisco. Are they just kind of the places where founders lived already, or is there something more to becoming a hub than that?
The start point for me is really to consider fintech hubs as a crowding in of possibilities and a crowding in of potential. Public sector, private sector, startup, scale up, the regulator, all in the mix, looking for optimal outcomes at pace. So as you rightly identify, Hong Kong, Singapore, London. But what I think is critical is to understand that this model isn't an out of the box, always having a certain size and a certain rigid structure. It's understanding the principles and the elements for success, and then crucially contextualizing that in any particular jurisdiction, in any particular market, in any particular region. So, for example, when I was fortunate enough to help Ron Khalifa with his fintech review a few years ago, what we were clear about was, though we had the fabulous financial centre in London, these fintech hubs could, should, and must be developed and deployed in, say, Leeds, Edinburgh, Cardiff, and be contextualized and specific in those regions to deliver success. So very much understanding the principles, the elements for success, the partnerships, and how ultimately, wherever they are, to crowd in possibilities, to crowd in potential.
Love that. Thank you. Pat, building on that then, do you think fintech hubs are sort of created or do they just form naturally? Is this sort of emergence of a hub something that sort of individuals are sort of deliberately making happen, or is there just a sort of a natural sort of congregation or crowding in, as Chris puts it?
Yeah, I think it's both organic and inorganic. Obviously, we have the outlier of what goes on in the US. I think that has largely been kind of organic in the way that it's arisen. But I think it's down to three things from my perspective. It's the policy layer, it's an infrastructure layer, and then it's an ecosystem layer. And if I sort of delve into those, the policy layer clearly is what governments provide, and ensuring that it's not just about consumer protection and security, which is of vital importance. It's also about innovation. And so, there are lots of examples where you can start to conceive either payments regulations or data protection regulations that provides both the ability to protect, but also provides opportunities to innovate. And as long as that's clearly communicated and articulated to the community, that really helps to drive that opportunities. Then the second layer is around the infrastructure, which is clearly at the government level, from my personal perspective. And that infrastructure layer, stems from a payment system that is real time, that can move money, the velocity of money quickly around an economy. So then you when you think about this, you don't need certain types of fintechs that are just plugging friction points in the system. You can actually start to build on top of a fully functioning kind of payments layer that you can start to provide new products and services. And then there's also the identity layer, which enables kind of digital identity seamlessly to prove who you are and to use in different instances. And I think the best example of this is probably the India stack, in the way that they have created a set of infrastructure that is the essence of a digital economy. And then organizations can start to innovate on top of this. And then the last layer is all about that ecosystem and how you start to foster that around innovation. And, it has to stem with corporates, ideally with innovation labs. So they're experimenting, and Singapore has a great example of that in that in 2015, 2016, it launched a number of initiatives to incentivize organizations from different jurisdictions to locate their innovation labs in the market. And the purpose of that was so then we could start to experiment, but also collaborate with fintechs. The next piece, clearly within that ecosystem, is around ensuring there are fintechs across the different verticals. So then you can start to collaborate there. And then clearly investments is a huge part of this, and it enables fintechs to flourish. And it's not just VCs, it's family offices, it's sovereign wealth funds, all of these communities coming together. And then the last piece of this ecosystem is all around kind of those ecosystem enablers. So events, forms a key part of this because it brings communities together. Associations play a key role, and then champions. And, you need these champions within the industry that go above and beyond and believe that there is value in people coming together. And it's the alignment of these three, I believe, that creates that fintech hub. I do think the term fintech hub is quite a media-driven term, and it is what you want it to be, as long as it's driving value to consumers, businesses, and everyone that requires products and services. And if you kind of subscribe to that famous Andreessen Horowitz quote that every company will be a fintech company in some way, shape, or form, there is a lot of blurring of lines, and certainly that's what we're seeing across Asia. If you think about the old concept of a super app and what that means in terms of blurring your retail life, your financial life, your social life in one app. But these are just some of the examples that we in Singapore, and I think further afield, we believe in.
Thank you. A really wonderfully comprehensive answer. Miranda, I'd love to bring you in on sort of that point about sort of ecosystems, events, associations, and champions, and all of that. Given that fintech is almost entirely digital, right? There's hardly anything tangible. I mean, to some extent, it's replacing notes and coins. Why is there a need to sort of gravitate towards physical locations? I mean, we tend to think of hubs as cities and people meet. Why is that important?
I think let me start by saying that fintech is relative to the market that it operates in. Fintech broadly in Africa is going to be very different to Europe or the US. In fact, recently I was at an African accelerator event, and somebody very well known, highly influential, was on a panel, and he made a comment around, we should think global, act local. Completely agree. But he followed that up with, and all founders should strive to become like a US founder or European founder, because that's how you know your business is going in the right direction. And I feel like that is so absolutely wrong, because what is relevant in Africa is going to be completely different to what's relevant somewhere else. To simply answer your question, the way that, I've interpreted it is we follow the money. From an African perspective, there's lack of access to capital, there's lack of access to investment, there's lack of access to true incubation and acceleration. If you're going to put a bunch of incubators and accelerators and hubs across the continent, what are we accelerating? And is the output of that tangible enough? Are these players supporting fintechs across all of their stages, early stages, mid stages, even established to get to their next level of global expansion? The reason that I see, and from experience, that from an African lens, founders and fintechs end up in these physical places is to get exposure and to understand and learn from those environments that are easier to innovate in, where regulation is a lot lighter and lenient and more almost welcoming of non-traditional financial services and solutions, so that we can pull and grasp from what has been done in other regions, bring it back home, contextualize it for the market, and then launch relevant products, in the countries that or where it's required. And I think that the fintech hub concept, and I agree with what, Pat was saying around it being more of a media term, right? If you look at some of these markets, Singapore, London, UAE versus Nairobi, Egypt, South Africa, and Nigeria, there's a clear distinction between a mature market and an emerging market. Mature market needs versus emerging market needs, financial inclusion, innovation, and fintech solutions versus digital banking, convenience. Let's do something cool, that's going to take us to the next level of innovation or convenience or experience for our customer. And those journeys should always be separated. You cannot have a mature market lens when looking at an emerging market use case. You cannot have that lens when you're looking at a hub or an incubator or founders. So what I do think is that right now, from my perspective and being a founder myself and having experienced some of these things firsthand, where, I think that I'm pretty well connected in terms of the industry that I play in within my region, but trying to get access to potential investors that understand the context of the environment that we operate in, which is very, very complex and very, very different, is tough. So naturally, I'm like, it would be great for me to go and spend a month in London. Let me go meet all of these cool people, learn from them, understand them, link up, get some exposure, but also create visibility for myself and my clients and partners and the regulation here, and try and cross-collaborate, and that would be great. But the reality is that what I draw from that, can I adequately apply it into my business, number one, and number two, into the market that I operate in, because it's so different. So I mean, I hope that gives you some clarity or some, view on the way that I see it, in terms of we would move to get visibility, to get exposure, and we would place ourselves in these environments where the attention is being given. Because until such a point where that attention and access is evenly spread and it's contextualized to, local markets, every market should be a fintech hub if there is innovation, opportunity, and potential in that country.
Thank you. You make so many really interesting points in there. including, of course, the huge differences between different countries, and the point that innovation that isn't relevant to customers is basically just sort of invention, isn't it? It's not actually innovation, because if it doesn't make any difference to people's lives, it doesn't help. But I want to pick up on the point you made about sort of lighter, more lenient regulation. And Lord Chris, I'd love to sort of bring you in on this. To what extent can governments make a sort of real difference to the progress of fintech? How fundamental is the sort of regulatory landscape, that sort of policy layer that Pat was talking about?
Yeah, and firstly, it was an excellent point that Miranda made, that context is everything, and why hubs matter is because no matter how good the technology is, fintech, like everything, is a fundamentally human endeavor. And all these technologies need to be considered as tools, incredibly powerful, potentially transformational tools, but in our human hands. I think that's absolutely vital. If we conceive of the golden threads of inclusion and innovation threading right through all of this, that will give us such a great opportunity of making a success of fintech hubs, combining, connecting right around the world. The role of government, absolutely critical. There's a false dichotomy which is often put out there that you either have to be heavily rules-based, prescriptive, or you hear the cry of the frontierist at every epoch, don't fence me in. But the truth is, neither of those are the right approaches, certainly not for inclusion and innovation. There always has been a critical function, a critical role for right-sized regulation. History tells us that right-sized regulation isn't just about citizen rights, consumer protection. It always leads to clarity, certainty, safety, security, which is what all innovators want. Right-sized regulation, an underpin, an essential for innovation, an essential for inward investment. If we take just a couple of examples from the United Kingdom, in 2016, the FinTech regulatory sandbox, a measure of success, well, replicated in well over 50 jurisdictions right around the world, a clear regulatory intervention. If we look at open banking, in many ways born in the United Kingdom, not by chance, but by a regulatory intervention with the CMA 9 order, the measure of success replicating well over 60 jurisdictions around the world, with many nations being able to take it out of the box, if you will, and in some ways get ahead of where the UK is at. So right-sized regulation is not only desirable, not only an underpin for innovation, inward investment and growth, it's an absolutely essential element, and it is government, it is regulators playing their part, and all of that takes us right back to that sense of this being a fundamentally human endeavor. And we need to package all of that up and express it as a narrative of welcome, whichever nation, whichever fintech hub we're talking about, a narrative of welcome, which doesn't just talk about the potential revenue streams, funding streams, but talks about the visa situation, talks about the regulatory environment. How long does it take to get, say, a senior manager over to be in a business? What is the education system? All these things in a really clear narrative of welcome to fintech founders and everybody else who we need to be in this environment, this ecosystem for innovation, and certainly for ultimately human, societal, and economic growth.
I love that. Pat, can I give the last word in this section to you? Can fintech hubs succeed without active support from government and regulators?
I don't think they can. Obviously, you have some outliers, but if we just roll back a little bit on what the so-called fintech hubs, however you want to define that, are seeking to do, for me, it's all around re-architecting the financial system. There are so many inequalities in that system. We still have 1.4 billion unbanked, countless others underbanked. We have countless even more others that may have financial products, but it's a moot point because they can't use those products because of the debt levels. So I kind of think we're living in a world where we've moved from this kind of first generation of the internet to this Web 2 world, and then we're somewhere in the middle between a Web 2, Web 3 world, that a lot of our products and services in financial services world have been designed or built, and even policies have been designed or built 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And, when you think about it in detail, it's the simple things you want to do with money. You want to spend it, you want to share it, you want to lend it, you want to borrow it, you want to manage it. I think there's like 6 or 7 simple things, and we built as a society, rightly, in the early days, these constructs, whether it's systems, legacy people, legacy processes, legacy rules around these that make it very tough to move that money and do the things you want to do with that money in today's world, which is kind of somewhere between that Web 2, Web 3 world. And what fintech hubs are seeking to address is bringing the financial system into sync with the current world. And to your question, it's very difficult to do that without a government or a regulator or policymakers that are in tune with these developments. And to Chris's points and Miranda's points, it's about making the lives of people better. It's about making the lives of businesses of all shapes and sizes, not just the large ones, and consumers, to be able to use that money in the way that they need to, in an efficient and effective way. So governments are core to helping and enabling this to spur the change that's required.
I love that. Thank you. It's a great lead into the second half of our conversation, where we're going to talk a bit more about what needs to happen next and what needs to happen over the long term. So that's a really good framework. So we will take a super quick break, and we will be back very shortly. Don't go away. Welcome back to Fintech Insider Insights, where we're discussing global fintech hubs and how governments can support them. So, Lord Chris, we sort of talked about how government involvement can sort of make or break the success of fintech in a market. And then Pat was talking about, there are regulations that were made 20, 30, 40 years ago that, not necessarily fit for purpose. You've been doing a lot of work in areas like artificial intelligence and blockchain and so on. How important is that to keep pushing and keep thinking about what's coming next and trying to get the right regulations in place? And how do you do that?
I think it's absolutely critical that all of us think about how we can enable the environment for these technologies, and indeed for technologies that haven't even been developed yet, to flourish for public good, for private good. And we know how to do this because we understand politics, philosophy, critical theory, ethics. We've got everything that we need to make a success of it. But we need to do it, I believe, in a slightly different way. And we certainly need to do it with more pace and in a way which is both technology neutral and indeed, by doing that, technology future-proofed. So a couple of quick examples. When we did the Electronic Trade Documents Act last year, I've described it variously as the most important legislation no one's ever heard of, and indeed the blockchain bill that never mentions blockchain. And it's critical on both those points because it's very specific, it's very simple, it enables trade documents to be held in electronic form. This is vital because they're different to contracts, for example, which set out a whole raft of terms. They're different because they're possessable in nature, that means you hold the paper, you hold the goods. So bills of lading, bearer bonds, etc. To make the intangible possessible is only possible because of the technologies that we currently have, blockchain being one of those. But to legislate in a way which sets out the criteria that the technology needs to achieve to perfect an electronic trade document is critical, because that's how you enable the technology neutrality, the technology future-proofing, and an innovative, competitive market to develop. Similarly, with artificial intelligence, I believe it's time to legislate. It's why I brought forward my artificial intelligence regulation bill to Parliament right now. Because, again, if we're to enable the opportunities, be cognizant and deal with the challenges and the risks, it seems to me that wait and see and a voluntary approach isn't the optimal way to do that. That's never been the way we've gone about things in the past. If we believe in these opportunities, then we should show leadership and we should legislate by understanding what are the critical elements, by understanding what we're trying to achieve. And there are many sections to my bill which we can unpack. But the most important one, I believe, is a clause around public engagement. Because if we don't have effective, meaningful, sustainable public engagement around the opportunities, the risks, the challenges of these new technologies, then how will it ever be enabled to be seen and felt as trustworthy? And without that trustworthiness, people will not want to avail themselves of services that are underpinned by these technologies, and they will step away or not indeed step towards these possibilities. Net outcome of that seems to me is individuals, communities, societies will not be able to achieve the benefits, the opportunities of these technologies, but will certainly, sadly, be saddled with the risks and the downsides.
Miranda, building on that, are there governments in parts of Africa or regulators that you can see have got that same kind of sort of forward-looking way of thinking about it, that are trying to put in place the sort of regulatory infrastructure the licensing environments and so on, that enable fintechs to thrive with sort of clear guidance and different ways of doing things? Are you seeing? I mean, I don't want you to tell me the ones that aren't doing it, but are there some countries where you say, hey, the government in, I don't know, Nigeria or whatever has done some really good things over the past few years and really is really sort of encouraging fintech in a really positive way?
Yeah, I think so. And I think just circling back to the fintech hubs, I think in South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt, these regulators are doing quite a bit to promote, support, fintech growth. However, it is, and back to contextualizing the nature of the region, right, in the market, it's that some of these use cases are not extremely innovative. They are very fundamental, very basic. There's still a large number of unbanked, people across this region. Today, even a mobile money user struggles to get their money across a border. So only a fraction of payments are built. And I think that at the very core and foundation, there is a lot of work that is being done to better understand how the ecosystem can collaborate in order to still protect a customer, mitigate against fraud and risk and money laundering and all of these illegal activities, but doing it, while providing a good experience to a consumer and solving a problem, right? I do, however, think that there's something that we have to be very cognizant of when we do talk about regulation, fintech, promoting and supporting these new use cases and non-traditional ways of payments, is that the reality is that we operate in quite a corrupt region. I live in a corrupt country. My regulator and my government makes some really questionable decisions, right? And I think that the moment that you open up the doors in terms of inviting in different ways of doing things, you're also relinquishing control, which has a subsequent impact on, how you're operating right now. Right. And I think that's very important. So whilst, yes, there is a large, responsibility on fintechs, on the banks, on the regulators, the associations, the various bodies, etc. There's also a responsibility on those that influence these various, partners or enablers and people in terms of looking at the macro environment too. Looking outside of just the industry that you play in, looking at the market that you operate in, and understanding some of those factors around it that has a direct impact and influence over how somebody gives access to somebody who doesn't even have basic human rights. So I think that it's a broad question. And yes, I have seen that. And just to circle it back, if you look at Rwanda, for example, the regulator in Rwanda has put out a digital agenda, right? So they are inviting global players to come into this market and contribute toward the economy and innovate in their countries and take, mobility solutions and other types of basic use cases that says, let's make this digital because we believe and we support that, this is the future. You will see the CBK has recently issued a number of digital lending licenses in the country, right? Because they're seeing the value behind the ability to provide credit and access and lending, in a way that enhances somebody's life. But there is still equal responsibility to say, how do we do that responsibly? How do we take this and put it in Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia? Because there is cross-sub-regional trade. There are cross-sub-regional use cases. The regulators need to engage and collaborate with each other because you can't do it in one country where there's a need in another. And the markets are fairly similar, right? And there has to be that ability to replicate these solutions and regulation to make it easier for fintechs to succeed, customers to benefit, and for economies to substantially thrive, through this new activity and boost in terms of financial services.
I love that point you made about how our governments and regulators or governments can stifle the development of innovation where you have sort of corruption and so on, and that can really slow down or even stop benefits coming through to the public. To Chris's point about getting that public engagement, that if you haven't got the rule of law, if you've got corruption, if you've got vested interests lobbying against new solutions that might cut away at their profits, then suddenly you don't get any of the benefits. But I want to build on that.
Sorry,
really
Benjamin.
Interesting point. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make this very tangible, right? What I mean, a very simple example. One of the largest countries on the continent recently holding elections. And what they did was they shut down the internet in the country for a couple of days just to lobby supporters to vote. What do you do in that situation? Whether you're a bank, whether you're a fintech, whether you're an association, these are just some of the realities in the market that we operate in that we have to take really seriously.
Pat, I'd love to bring you in on this point about sort of international collaboration that Miranda is making, and Lord Chris was talking earlier about how many regulators are following each other, working closely with each other, and so on. How important is that international collaboration, do you think, in driving the growth of fintech and helping people around the world benefit from what technology can do?
Yeah, it's absolutely essential. And before I kind of address some of that question, I'd be keen to kind of build on Miranda's point there. So we've been doing quite a bit of work with Rwanda, actually, the government in Rwanda, and also in Ghana as well. And the piece that we're doing there, so we're convening the right people from different geographies, certainly Southeast Asia and parts of LATAM, coming together for the different programs we run in Ghana. There are similar challenges that we're seeing across these regions. And, one of the things that we're looking to do is how do you create an alignment between regulators. So organizations, ideally fintechs, but of all shapes and sizes, can scale products and services in multiple markets. Because if you have to reconfigure your tech stack or your product or service to be able to deploy it in another country, it becomes very cumbersome and prohibitive. And so that scaling element, so businesses, products and services can scale across and start to solve real problems in the marketplace. You know, those problem statements is essential. The second piece is around that infrastructure layer that I talked about. You know, the fundamentals of any digital economy is that payments layer that's interoperable, is a digital identity layer that's linked to this stack, and then it's a data exchange, and then a consent architecture layer. And if you have those four pillars, and I'm sure there'll be more pillars starting to be developed, you have the fundamentals of a digital economy. And those are the things that we've started to kind of the conversations with a number of governments across Africa. It isn't something you can just switch on. It does take time, and funding requirements are there, which kind of leads me to the next point around building capital markets infrastructure. And that is a huge topic. So certain markets can become self-funding, can become a little bit more self-sufficient and not reliant on funds coming in from outside of the region. And where there is volatility in other countries, you can start to build your own infrastructure of all types that are required for fintech to flourish. So that's kind of one piece that we've been doing. The next piece, when I think about it, is, you know, you think Singapore is a very small country. It's, you know, virtually 2/3 the size of London, I think, in and around that number. But it's what we've managed to do really well is a lot of organizations come to Singapore and use that as a beachhead into Southeast Asia or South Asia, where the markets are much larger. There are lots of problem statements to solve. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of that innovation and development coming along. And a lot of these organizations may have very limited footprints in Singapore, but are serving markets that are multiples the size. So you think Indonesia is kind of the fourth or fifth largest country in the world, which rarely gets talked about. And then obviously you have India, not far away, which has a wealth of opportunities and you know, an efficient tech stack, but a lot of opportunities to increase the velocity of money traveling around the economy. So, you know, micro businesses as well as, you know, larger organizations can benefit. But the bit that we haven't really talked about is, you know, you have the traditional elements of fintech, but there is massive need on micro-based products. So whether it's micro insurance, whether it's micro pensions, all of these are vital products for people. And that's some of the things that we've started to do and started to talk about. And let's say we talk about, we just convene the right people, the right conversation with a tangible set of outcomes over a period of 1 to 2 years. So projects and initiatives actually spin out from these dialogues. Otherwise, a dialogue with no outcomes is kind of purposeless, really. So that's kind of some of the bits that we're doing in Elvandi. But the way we see it is connecting the world to have these conversations in those three verticals of regulatory, policymaking, technologists, and financial institutions of all shapes and sizes.
Love it. We're running out of time. Lord Holmes, the last sort of quick follow-on to what Pat was saying there. Are you seeing that sort of level of collaboration across regulators that we've sort of been talking about? Are you talking to lots of sort of policymakers and lawmakers in other markets?
We're seeing a good level of collaboration. What I think we need to see nation by nation is more horizontal connectivity between our regulators in country. It's why in my AI bill, I suggest a small, agile AI authority, not to be a do-it-all regulator, but to have that horizontal approach to look across all regulators to assess their competency to deal with AI, to look across all relevant legislation to assess its competency to address the challenges and opportunities. And then going from that, we need far greater international collaboration, because ultimately the greatest opportunities of these new technologies are that they are borderless. Barriers to entry for new entrants, new ideas are way lower in many, many ways. But if we don't get it right, we'll be way higher if we enable winner takes all in terms of cloud, in terms of wallets, in terms of digital ID, which has rightly been identified. Whereas if we have that level of collaboration, if we reimagine how we can do international standard setting, again, not as a protectionist or a barrier, but as an enabler, everything that Miranda said on financial inclusion is absolutely vital. That sense of enablement and empowerment that can come from fintech, but we still have such a way to go. If, for example, we can give digital ID and a wallet to individuals who find themselves in such difficult situations in refugee camps, for example, then my word, we can achieve together some stunning, stunning results for our societies, for our economies, for our polities, for our world. And we certainly need that right now, because there's not only quite a rise in protectionism, retreatism, populism, the geopolitical outlook is really desperately worrying right now. And many of the old institutions that were set up in the post-war settlement are really in need of transformation also. And it's these new technologies and it's fintech which can play its part in enabling that. And we have great regulators in Singapore. I think what the MAS is doing is really interesting in terms of being part of the mission, much more than some other regulators. The Hong Kong regulator is very interesting, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, but it really is reaching right around the world to learn, to go on this mission as a collaborative, connective journey, to crowd in possibilities, potential, where everybody can play their part and everybody has a stake in this, everybody has a voice, and everybody can benefit from the output.
Wonderful. Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree with what you just said. So all we have time for is one last quick fire question that actually Lord Chris has just sort of answered. Besides your own country and city, where would you start a fintech and why? Miranda, which hub would you pick apart from your own country and city?
I would go and start a fintech in Côte d'Ivoire. The shisha's good, the food's good, there's problems to solve, there's lives to change. It's a beautiful country, and I'd love to learn to speak French.
How about you, Pat?
I think it would have to be India. I just think the opportunities are vast. There is a lot of work to do. So while it has a great infrastructure, it still doesn't extend beyond the major cities. And so there is a lot of work to be done that can create opportunities, whether it's micro pensions or micro insurance based products, that satisfies the soul, I think.
And Lord Chris?
I'm with Pat. I would go India for the opportunity, for the size of the positive impact that one could have. As he rightly mentioned, what they've done with digital ID is really interesting. Huge nation, huge potential. It would be extraordinarily exciting to be down there and just love the food.
Wonderful. Well, that wraps up our discussion today. Thank you all so much for joining me and for all the fantastic points. Where can people find out a little bit more about each of you? Miranda?
I'm on LinkedIn, Miranda Piramal. The name of my business is called Scale. You can also send me a WhatsApp. That's all linked on my LinkedIn profile. My website is www.enabling-scale.com.
Thank you. Pat?
So yeah, LinkedIn, elevandi.io is the website. We're running a number of activities. So the next one up is in Ghana in May in Accra. Then we have an activity in Switzerland, Point Zero. That's a policy tech dialogue. Then we go to Rwanda in August. That's more about infrastructure and technology coming together. And then we have a number of activities where kind of sizing up in LATAM as part of the G20. As soon as that's out, we'll make sure that that's known. And then we have the huge kick-ass Singapore FinTech Festival that brings all of the boys and the girls to the yard to solve some of the world's problems in financial services.
Fantastic. And Lord Holmes?
Likewise, LinkedIn at Lord Chris Holmes, blog, lordchrisholmes.com, website, chrisholmes.co.uk, and really would love to hear from everybody, because we only make this a real success if everybody has a voice, everybody uses that voice. It'd be great to hear from everybody.
Thank you. And you can find me, Benjamin Ensor, on LinkedIn, or you can find out about the work the team is doing at 11fs.com. So thank you all so much to my three fantastic guests for joining. Thank you, all of you, for listening. If you like what you've heard, please do follow the podcast. Please do leave us a review or let us know what you'd like to hear about on future shows. If you want to join the conversation, find us on social media. Just search for 11FS or Fintech Insider. Thank you all so much, and goodbye.